Well, hello, and we're back, and we're going to talk about Task 3. This is part 4 of a series all about Task 3. This one is about understanding and using feedback. So, Rubric 13, I have found is one that the students at my university struggle with the most. And I actually think it has to do with the fact that they aren't aware that the information for this rubric 13 all comes from one little piece that is about this big, and it says 2C. It's just 2B or 2C is one of those, but it's very small, and I think it's 2C, and they just don't realize how much has to come from that one thing. So let's take a look. So far in this series, we've discussed selecting an assessment, creating your evaluation criteria, analyzing student work, selecting the 3 work samples, and documenting feedback. This one is going to be about student use of feedback, and my next part will be on academic language use. It's best to go ahead and start thinking about how you're going to have students how you're going to plan to have students understand and use the feedback. Here is what it says in Making Good Choices. How do I explain how my focus students will understand and use feedback I give? So the whole purpose of giving feedback is to help them understand what they know and what they still need to know. But oftentimes you may find that students don't really read your feedback, or they don't understand what the feedback means. I find even at the college level, if I give feedback to students, they will look at the grade, but they will not take the extra step often to look at the feedback I gave. And then they continue to make the same errors um, in subsequent assignments. And so I have to figure out a way, just like you do, of how am I going to uh, push it? How am I going to get my students to look at the feedback, to try to come to an understanding of the feedback, and then apply it? Because research has shown that the opportunity to apply feedback promotes learning. So when you respond to this prompt, you'll want to make sure that you describe specific opportunities for the focus students to understand and use feedback. What are you going to do to ensure that students understand the feedback that they were given? So think about strategies for that. Are there opportunities in the next lessons that are coming up? Would revision of the work sample be a more powerful learning experience? Is there additional support that might scaffold the application of the feedback? Do the focus students have different needs that would imply different choices? So your explanation should demonstrate that you've considered how and when students might best apply the feedback to support and extend their learning. This is rubric 13. And rubric 13 shows that for level 3, the candidate describes how focus students will understand or use feedback related to the learning objectives. Now, we talked about feedback in the previous um, part of this series. So I'm not going to talk about that now, but you do need to have quality feedback, and feedback's not the same as praise. And we do need to remember that the feedback we give needs to be related to the learning objectives that the assessment was assessing. Level 4, candidate describes how he or she will support focus students to understand and use feedback on their strengths or weaknesses related to the learning objectives. So now we're looking for them to describe feedback as it relates to how students understanding and using feedback. And the feedback can be the feedback that we gave on their strengths or their weaknesses. You all hear my kitty cat meowing. She's fussing at me because she wants me to play with her. You're gonna say hi. Oh, she doesn't want to come. Oh, she's being a cat. Level 5 is okay. Okay, I'll talk to you too. I'll teach this to you, Annie Cat. Level 5, candidate describes how he or she will support. Well, so here's the students will understand, but notice candidate will support. Candidate will support focus students. How are you going to support them in understanding and using feedback? So let's be clear about what this is not. If you give them, if you say, okay, you didn't do very well on this math um, exercise or these math problems, and if you send it home for them to fix for homework, then they may, you know, get a chance to redo it, but they're not getting your support. That would be a level 3 of how they will use feedback, but it's not going to be how you support them in doing it. So it gets a little complicated because it's understand and use feedback, strengths and weaknesses. So here's a one. This is from the Thinking Organizers put out by Illinois State University. A lot of it's used, and you can find that on AACTE if you look in the, it's not the resource library. Uh, I'll get back to you on what that's called. Anyway, the how will you support students? So here, this person is showing how you can, this organizer shows how you take each student. How will the student understand and use feedback for further learning to for their current work, and how will you support? So this I think will get you up to a level 4, 3 or 4, but it's not a 5 because to do a 5 you got to really talk about those strengths and weaknesses. So I kind of came up with something else that we'll look at in just a minute. So this is, if we want to talk about what understanding feedback is. So an example of understanding feedback is candidate reviews work with whole class, focusing on common mistakes that explicitly includes content that one or more focus students were given feedback on. An example of using feedback, that's where you might ask focus students to revise work using feedback given and resubmit the revised work. But for a level 4 to be, distinguished from a level 3, the candidate describes how they plan and implement support. So just going over it with them and making sure they understand it, and then just giving them the assignment of revision does not really mean support. So, for example, a candidate may work with focus students in a small group, that's support, and reteach several concepts they struggle with on their assessment, using a graphic organizer to further develop understanding of each concept, such as a T-chart or concept map. Next, students would be given an opportunity to revise their responses involving those concepts, using the graphic organizer to support their revisions. So this example shows how a candidate might help focus students understand their feedback in relation to misunderstandings and support them in using that feedback to enhance. This type of plan support could take place with the whole class as long as explicit attention to one or more of the focus student's strengths or weaknesses is addressed in relation to the feedback given. And here's an example of a 5. Students are to review feedback when I return homework sheets and are to look for the steps given to solve the empirical formula problems in their notes. Student A represents the group of students who mastered setting up the conversions from grams to moles, but who will need to practice adding up molecular masses for molecules that have parentheses in the formula, something, something, something. I don't know what that is. And so I will write 5 similar formulas on the smartboard so students can copy the formulas and can master the concept of molecular masses prior to moving. So anyway, it's a pretty detailed answer. So here's what I'm suggesting. you take each student, student 1, and talk about how you're going to help them understand their strengths, how you're going to help them understand their needs. So in one paragraph, you would write about student 1, how they understand their strengths, how they understand their needs. Then student 1, how they're going to use their strengths and their needs. So helping them understand their strengths and then their needs, and then how they might possibly use their strengths to overcome their needs might be a really good approach. Here's an example of one of my students from 2017. So look how much. So this is one of the problems, is that people don't write enough for this. And this person, she did not worry herself with how much she wrote. As long as you're staying within the page limits, and she did. So she had a paragraph for focus student 1, paragraph for focus students 2, and all through, I didn't highlight the whole thing, but all through she's talking about what they did well on, what they struggled, supporting them in their understanding of feedback, supporting them in using the feedback. So she uses those words from the rubrics and makes it real strong. So this brings us to the end of this particular section. Yay! And so I hope you will return and take a look at some more of our uh, series of All About Task 3. And I'll see you online.